Okay, students, apologies for missing office hours. Had some issues with some DC traffic yesterday that prevented me from getting home in time. But one of the couple of the students had some questions, and this came up, and I wanted to touch on it related to what's good form versus poor form in some of the coding. So in that last exercise, it was to create a CLT, take your CLT function which you had previously created, and then put that inside of a function that will turn around and iterate through it and print off 5 copies of it. So again, remember, I had given you this template that you could use. So let's just say that this is our wrapper function, run CLT, is what we're going to do in order to run through it 5 times and to print. So I've set this up. So we've got parameters which I'm going to throw to my function, but then I'm also going to have this on a loop so I know how many times it's going to loop forward. Like in this case, a selection would be 5. So here's my CLT function. Let's just say that this is what I've wrote. Doesn't really matter what we have in here for the function, but good form would be you define the function as few times as possible. You define it once and then use it within your structure right down here. So as you can see right here, I have a CLT function, and then within run CLT, I'm simply calling CLT. Now I can call it a number of times, but this has only been defined one time, and this has only been defined one time. That's what would be considered good form. So then when I actually run my function, so here the first parameter is how many faces on the dice that I'm going to, this is rolling dice to determine the CLT piece. The first part is going to say a 1 to 6, so it's going to be a 6-sided dice. I'm going to roll 5 dice at one time. I'm going to roll this series 10,000 times, take 10,000 samples off of it, and I'm going to have my label as dice, just dice by itself. So that's what the parameters are that I'm feeding into my CLT function. And I also have an optional one here of show curve. I want to not show the curve on the first 4, and then the last one I want to show the curve. And so that's really this additional optional piece which I've put into my function. And let's just say that this is my function. Now this is good form because it's only been defined one time. It's been defined separately like this. Some students have been writing it similar to this function. So this would be considered poor form. So within your wrapper function, actually defining the function again inside of your wrapper function, and then you still call it. Now this will technically work, but this is not what would be considered good form for writing this type of code. Why? Because every time it runs CLT, it's going to be redefining the CLT function. It's going to have to do a lot of overhead for something that you'd only have to do one time. So you wouldn't typically do this. You would typically have that outside. Now we have seen in like the recursive function example, we have seen it do this before, and there's some examples in the textbook where they're doing this, where they're defining a function within a function, as you see here. The reason for doing that is you may want to modify the build of that function itself. So let's say you may want to have some kind of hard-coded things inside of your function declaration so that depending on what's happening on the outside loop, it'll then turn around and redefine that function in a different way. Well, then that would be a use case where this type of a structure would be considered good form. But since the CLT function is not changing each time it goes through that for loop, there'd be no reason for you to put it on the inside. So again, for this week's assignment, and what would be considered generally good form is define it in this way so it's only defined one time. And then after that, just call the function instead of doing something like this. Several students kind of had that. They've had some problems. They've had some problems with closing brackets. They've had some problems with odd characters showing up in the console. If you do it using the good form up here, you should not have those types of issues. So I just want to have a quick little video on that. If you've got any questions, please just hit me back on it. Thanks. Bye.